So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the observer and the observed. And you may have heard about this through other teachers, philosophers, gurus. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think of it and deconstruct it a little bit and perhaps alter it slightly. So the idea behind the observer and the observed is that there is an entity inside of us, which is our self, which is a psychological phenomenon, which is our psychological individual self. And that is what we observe. So that's the observed. And then there is more of us, or an additional action of observation of who we are, of what that is, and that is the observer. And because there is this observer that's observing the observed, that can lead to inner conflict. So that's the basic idea behind the observer and the observed. And I think that in a lot of respects is correct and accurate. What I want to talk about is less the observed right now and more the observer. And the reason that I want to do that is because it seems to me that the inability for us to become aware of the observed is because of the activity of the observer. And so instead of focusing on trying to get ourselves to stop being angry or stop wanting or not wanting things, or our countless opinions about our lives, I think it's more important to focus, at least initially, on the activity of the observer and not the observed, because I think that that's closest to the surface of our day-to-day experience, is not all of our problems, which maybe we think we have some eye into, but rather how we try to handle our problems. And so this is the typical pattern. We have a bout of anger or frustration, or we're anxious about something, or scared about something, or we need something. And from there, we try to address that issue. And we do that to ourselves. This is an internal process. And so I've created a list of ways that I think that we try to address our inner conflict, our inner problems. And here's the list: justify, defend, deny, analyze, attempt to understand, name it to feel a sense of understanding, try to learn from it, criticize yourself about it, think what you should be like, feel, or think instead, think how you should have thought or felt that way, or how you shouldn't have thought or felt that way, have an opinion about it, be frustrated that it occurred, have anxiety about it, be sad about it, think of the ideal way you should have been or what you should have thought instead, assert a belief about it, whether contrary to it or in support of it, accept it, reject it, attempt to somehow dominate or control it through effort and thought, try to solve it, think about ways to escape from it, create something about it, such as artwork, or explain it to yourself. So I think you get the idea. There is this activity that we are 100% behind the activity that we think we can do something about ourselves. And we need to become aware of that. Now, why do we need to become aware of that? We need to become aware of that because that is how we are trying to be aware of what we are. That is how we're trying to address our problems. And it doesn't work. It adds an extra layer of complexity and problems to our circumstance. So I talked before about trying to become aware of this process. And instead of using the terms observer and observed, which I think are good terms, I like to use the terms primary thought feelings and secondary thought feelings, and I'll explain why. To me, all of our sort of individual problems, all of the activity of our individual selves is the primary thought feeling. And I say thought feeling because I think that really the activity of the self is a conglomerate of, there is a feeling aspect to these thoughts. And that feeling typically is struggle, effort. There is an energy about these thoughts that is palpable. It is a visceral feeling. And it's part of what I think gives us an eye into the fact that we have these activities going on in the first place. So it's almost a marker, if you will, of the types of thoughts that are contained and utilized by our own self, which is really, it's self-interest. It's our individual will. So we have these primary thought feelings, and then we respond to them with secondary thought feelings. And I think that that really emphasizes the fact that these are two bursts of activity. Two bursts of activity. One burst of activity being the primary thought feeling, or the observed, and then the secondary thought feeling, which is the observer. Now the observer comes in and does all those things, and many more probably, that I haven't even listed there. And so the question is, if this is the structure of our psychological activity inward, can we become aware of that activity? Can we become aware of this structure within ourselves? And like I've said before, I think that the key is not to focus necessarily on the primary thought feeling, but rather on the secondary thought feelings, because those are most at the surface of our consciousness. So if we can start to become aware of those secondary thought feelings, is it possible that those will end? Are we able to become passively aware of these secondary thought feelings? Passively aware. Not saying, oh, I see how I was justifying how I felt. That's tertiary thought feeling, right? So that's the key. And so I think if you can do that, what you might find is that the awareness of these secondary thought feelings leads to their resolution. And you may say to me, that doesn't work. Or you may say, I agree. Either way, it doesn't matter. What matters is it possible to do this? Is it possible to become passively aware of these thought feelings? And I think once you find that ability, then you can see the possibility. And because there are so many different ways that these thought feelings operate, it's not like you become aware of one manipulation in your mind and then everything is gone. This is the process. And these thought feelings that we have are so embedded in how we deal with our lives, and they've been there for probably our entire lives, that it would seem to me a little overly optimistic to think that realizing something like this about yourself once would lead to everything stopping. I think what happens is the momentum starts to decrease. The momentum of these thought feelings decreases. So let's say you become aware that the whole time all you've been doing to try to deal with your anger is trying to learn about your anger, to learn about what makes you angry, why you're angry, learn some kind of technique about how to handle your anger. And you see yourself making those thought efforts in trying to manage your anger. They may still continue to pop up. But eventually what you find is the momentum is lost. Your conviction in those thought processes weans. And it gets down to a point where you're almost left with what I affectionately call a nubbin of effort. Now that's, for anyone who watches Friends, Matthew Perry, may he rest in peace. I use the word nubbin because that to me is what it feels like. You may not dive deep into criticizing yourself over the thoughts or feelings you just had, but you may just start to have an effort towards doing so. And the awareness of the beginning of that effort will not let it progress, and it will just end. A couple last key things I want to bring up. The secondary thought process is, generally speaking, a response to the first thought process. So that's almost something that you can sense. What you can sense as you become more aware of these secondary thought feelings is how your secondary thought feeling is looking back in a way on what just happened, that first thought feeling. So you have some anger, and you're addressing that anger by trying to control it, saying, I shouldn't be that way. There is almost a psychological looking back on that anger. It can be subtle, but I think it's there. It's not always a mental image of what occurred, but it could be. But there is this sense that you're looking back at the past, at something that has already occurred, and that's something you can sense. And then the second thing I would say, which is really, I don't want to say the goal of this, but is in the end, your new opportunity. Once all that activity of the secondary thought processes die down, what comes into the forefront is the primary thought feelings. And the primary thought feelings is really the meat of who we are psychologically, all of our struggles, all of our problems, everything about us that causes such unhappiness, with occasional happiness. Sometimes there's pleasure, you're happy about things, you like things. But by and large, I'd say 80-90% of activity in our minds is negative. And I think that's why people sort of emphasize that, and when they talk, we should sort of talk about the positive responses and reactions to our lives, our pleasures. But all of the sort of deep-rooted issues in our lives can then be looked into. We can then start to look into, become aware of, and see if it's possible to understand what's going on inwardly. But as long as we are running amok with these secondary thought feelings, as long as the observer is active, the observer, the secondary thought feelings, these are thought processes. This is not awareness. As long as all of that is still highly active, we will continue to get nowhere in this process. Thanks for watching.